In One Piece chapter 1097, it was finally confirmed after literal years of speculation that Dragon was a former member of the Marines. It's just one of those beautiful things about One Piece, how Oda is able to connect basically everything. You can look at most things in the past and derive some conclusion from it that could be relevant in the future. Of course, Garp is a Marine. Garp is Luffy's grandfather, which means that Garp is Dragon's father. Breaking news, I know. We then see throughout the story how Garp is motivated to make his children basically into Marines. He tried it with both Ace and Luffy. It didn't go well, but dang it, he tried. We award points for that. But from this alone, you know that Garp also would have wanted Dragon to join the Marines, would have encouraged him to do that, which makes Dragon being an actual Marine likely, and that was confirmed. But now that this is officially official, I think that there's something else that we now know, almost for a fact. Dragon and the current fleet admiral of the Marines, Akainu, have history. I would wager a lot of money that Dragon and Akainu know each other extremely well. They most likely grew up in the Marines together, starting as recruits. Basically, guys, it absolutely is not a coincidence that both Akainu and Dragon are exactly 55 years old, with Marine connections. So I think it's about time that we talk about these connections and make some juicy theories. If you're enjoying all the content, feel free to subscribe and click the bell to be notified. With that being said, let's begin. Hey YouTube, Joeboy here. So to understand Dragon and Akainu's relationship, I think that you need to understand Dragon and Akainu as individuals. Look, if I had to label one thing about Akainu that I think that defines him, that you need to know, it's that he really only cares about the Marines, nothing else. How people around the world perceive that organization is Akainu's #1 concern. It's not even about justice. Think about all the atrocities that the warlords were responsible for. None of it mattered until the world found out. The Chichibukai over there being evil, and Akainu really doesn't care. At least, it really doesn't seem that way. Akainu's like, go be evil somewhere nobody can see. Then it's cool. If you analyze pretty much all of the dialogue that Akainu has ever had throughout the story, it will tell you that the reputation of the Marines is what matters most. And in this respect, it might be fitting that of the 3 original admirals, only Akainu is the one that Oda drew wearing his literal Marine hat. But yeah, you gotta realize that Akainu was not introduced until Marineford, so everything that we know about him comes pretty much from the post-timeskip. And it's not as though we get a scene with him in every chapter. You can count them on your hands. So what Oda decides to focus on with the time available to him matters. And you guys know he's just basically always mad because things have not been going well. Poor guy. So regardless of whether it's him arguing with the Gorosei or arguing with Fujitora, the concept which underlines all of this is, how do the Marines look because of what has occurred here? So for the Marines, there's this sort of weird balance, which is the fact that they are subservient to the celestial dragons. They are the gods who have dictated the laws or the rules, and the Marines defend these laws, despite the fact that the celestial dragons are obviously very corrupt, evil, and just despicable people. But yeah, while this is a weird balance for most regular people, for Akainu it is decidedly less unmanageable. Because for Akainu, it is my opinion that it doesn't necessarily matter that the laws that he enforces are just. It simply matters that they are obeyed. So long as people obey the Marines, Akainu is in his happy place. And so anything which threatens their ability to do this or encourages people to not obey is bad. Okay. I suppose the best way to convey this is to look at Marineford, right? Murdering somebody, regardless of whether they have committed a crime, is illegal without a trial. And it is certainly illegal to murder someone before they have committed a crime. But Akainu has no problem doing any of this if it serves the Marines. So in Marineford, he straight up killed somebody who was not even a deserter, just simply was about to be a deserter. And he didn't even try to encourage him to stay. He just murdered him. But of course, I do think that there is an explanation for this. The Marine was worried about his family. And Akainu said, if you're really worried about your family, die honorably here. The implication is that Akainu believes that everyone is safer so long as the Marines are held in high regard, are feared and loved, depending on who you ask. So a deserter who makes the Marines look bad is literally, in Akainu's mind, a threat to the world, which he took care of very personally. But the point of what I'm saying is so that you understand that to Akainu, the Marines are justice. Anything which works against them as an organization is therefore unjust, in Akainu's mind. And I actually think that this whole scene was foreshadowing of Dragon and Akainu's relationship. What is Dragon? He is a deserter. A very high profile one, but still the same nonetheless. And honestly, I think that it's fair to wonder just how responsible Dragon is. Dragon's actions are creating the Akainu that we see today. Would he be committing crimes in order to protect the image of the Marines if it weren't for Dragon. We'll come back to this later. But anyway, I think that it's this conversation which sheds light on what Akainu is potentially capable of doing. This is pretty hardcore speculation, but I do wonder if Akainu thought that by becoming Fleet Admiral, he'd be better able to protect the Marines. His goal is simply to eliminate the threats to them. And as Fleet Admiral, he has the power to direct this energy. But yeah, despite this, things are not going in a good direction. So we have a theory about what Vegapunk might do here soon in Egghead. I'll go ahead and include it as a link in the description. But the general premise is that at some point in time, whether it's sooner or later, the Revolutionary Army will reveal the truths that they have gathered. Basically, reveal the things which justify why Dragon left the Marines. In Dressrosa, Oda decided to include the Revolutionary Army in a way which didn't seem all that necessary. The Revolutionary Army is interested in the world government's corruption and secrets. And specifically in Dressrosa, they were tracking down the weapons that the world government was funneling to various countries that the Revolutionary Army had freed. These weapons, we later learned, were created in Wano. The government had a business relationship, had a deal with Kaido. And the middleman in all of this was Doflamingo. So very frankly, Oda took the time to include this element of the Revolutionary Army's story in Dressrosa. I expect it to pay off at some point in the future, and the way that this pays off is the Revolutionary Army simply reveal this to the world. Things like Stussy, who we now know is a subordinate to Vegapunk, being an underworld emperor, a literal underworld emperor, and also CP0 member. Obviously this intel would undermine the world government, it would undermine the Celestial Dragons, but it also undermines the Marines who support them. Basically, this reveal would break the entire world and would most definitely make the Marines look pretty dang bad. And I think that if this happens, we could see Akainu or Sakazuki react pretty strongly in order to protect the Marines, even if that meant opposing the world government. Because for Akainu, it is my opinion that they do not matter as much as the Marines do. But let's not get ahead of ourselves, okay? To me, it's clear now that Akainu and Dragon are actually foils of each other. Oda designed them as opposite sides of the same coin. I mentioned the theory of Akainu opposing the world government for one simple reason, and it's not just the fact that I believe that that will happen. Considering this is a video about Dragon, I just find it intriguing that he is literally the leader of the Revolutionary Army, whose sole objective is to oppose the Celestial Dragons. So I suppose we are actually speculating in a roundabout and hilarious way Akainu does become the leader of a kind of revolution. It would just be of a nature very different to Dragon's. You might find this thought absurd, but if you've studied history at all, it really isn't. Did you know that Hitler saw himself as a revolutionary? It's interesting how in history the concept of a revolutionary is romanticized. The word is most commonly used when talking about some group of people trying to upset the evil established order. But there are many examples from actual history of revolutionary leaders becoming dictators. The revolutionary leader either becoming what they once fought against or creating something worse in a different way. So it makes me wonder whether Oda intended all along to have Dragon and Akainu sort of mirror this story. Because look guys, if Akainu as Fleet Admiral ever decides to break the Marines away from the government, as it becomes clear that the government and the Celestial Dragons are unjust, quite literally demons on Earth, this information disseminates. Pretty obviously a lot of Marines and a lot of people around the world will agree with him. It could be seen as a revolution. But given what we know about Akainu, we know that his objective here would be martial law. And I think that this is a story which might potentially resonate with Oda and the people of Japan. We just visited Wano. We know what a shogun is. But in the past, shogun was actually a military leader, like a general, or like an admiral. And this military leader led Japan for approximately 800 years. But maybe we're out in space right now. Let's reel it back in. The title of Akainu's justice is Thorough Justice, and you would expect from this that he's just out to destroy evil in all of its forms. But that doesn't really make sense, because he didn't want to abolish the Chichibukai. He does not fight against the Celestial Dragons. Clearly, thorough justice does not include this. This is why I think that Akainu believes that the Marines are justice, because they enforce the law and order. So the actual laws and the actual order matters very little, so long as they are followed. The world is safer because of their existence. For Akainu, the Marines exist for one purpose, making sure that order is maintained. And Dragon, as a former member of the Marines, is opposite. And not just because Dragon is a pacifist and Akainu is a murderous warmonger. For Akainu, justice is a tool to maintain order. But for Dragon, chaos is a tool in order to maintain justice. Without justice, order is oppression. Between the two, it's basically a question of what is more important, order or justice. In order to maintain order, Akainu will do anything. And in order to maintain justice, Dragon will do anything. We all know that most of the Marines and all the admirals have their own concept, their own philosophy on justice. Between Dragon and Akainu, I think the difference is obvious. Dragon has an incredibly strong sense of right and wrong, and Akainu does not. In a way, I like to think of Akainu as the Hody Jones of the Marines. Inside, he's empty. Like, the contradiction with Hody Jones is that he's mad at all this racist stuff, and yet, when asked, he had never personally experienced any of it. Bro's just mad. With Akainu, the contradiction is that he is supposed to be, as the Fleet Admiral, the flag bearer of justice. A moral and ethical leader whose primary concern is the well-being of the people. But funny thing is, I don't think that Akainu possesses either empathy or compassion. Our guy just wants to tell people what to do. Akainu is the Hody Jones of the Admirals. Tell me why I'm wrong. Oda does an absolute ton of these sorts of comparisons, and you can do a lot of them within the Marines themselves. What justice means to them and how they choose to pursue it matters. And I think that if you look at them all, it forms a spectrum. Garp is a whole conversation that is fascinating. I don't actually think people realize how similar Garp is to Luffy. He is his biological grandfather and actually reflects that in the story. Because what's important to Garp is freedom. And things like order and structure and rules matter very little to him. Basically, like Dragon and like Luffy, Garp has a strong sense of personal justice, and the Marines simply give him the capacity to pursue this how he wants to. But the big difference between Garp and both Dragon and Akainu is that Dragon and Akainu are trying to influence others, influence the state of the world and its organization. But Garp only really cares about himself. So long as he is personally free to pursue his own personal form of justice, he's happy. And you'll see he's not happy when he can't do that. Basically, Garp and Luffy are the same. They just chose different factions in order to be free. Kizaru, like Akainu, is loyal to the Marines, but not because he has deluded himself about what they are. It's because he doesn't think that he can do anything about it, or that the alternative would be better. Kizaru essentially exists in this awkward state where he would like to be Garp, but the order of the world actually matters. Basically, I think that he agrees with Akainu, but it hurts him. Aokiji is also interesting just because, like Dragon, he left the Marines, but probably not for the same reason. In my eyes, what Aokiji stands for is personal justice. You gotta remember that Garp was Aokiji's mentor. He was trained by him, and most likely looked up to him. So I think for Aokiji, the Marines need to be free to pursue what they think is right, as opposed to the letter of the law or what the Fleet Admiral decides. And Aokiji is this way because he struggles to figure out what it is that he actually believes, or at least that was the case while he was Admiral. So when a friend and a character like Jaguar D-Sol saves Robin, Aokiji needs to see, did this decision make the world better or worse? Because he doesn't know. And this is kind of the fundamental dividing line between the hypothetical of like, what would the Marines be like if Aokiji had become Fleet Admiral instead? It's all about freedom. Freedom to act on and determine your own justice. Akainu stifles this freedom, like his anger towards Fujitora for essentially doing this. But anyway, we've said a lot of things and maybe you don't see the point yet. When you're talking about Marine characters, the buzzwords are order, justice, and freedom. All of these terms contradict each other in different ways. It's like the holy trinity of why it is difficult to be a Marine. Because order fundamentally opposes freedom and justice, but freedom fundamentally opposes justice and order, yet justice fundamentally opposes order and freedom. I am literally sitting here wondering to myself whether I should explain this or if that will bog down the video. I really don't know. I think that freedom being opposed to order is something that everyone understands and doesn't need explanation. But justice is interesting. With any set of laws or any established order, right, you can't always have justice, because there's always exceptions to the rules. However, justice and freedom are also opposed because everyone's justice is individual, like what you perceive as right or wrong or ethical or moral. And it is also true that these things can restrict your own freedom. Freedom being defined as what it is that you want to do and how you want to do it. You limit yourself in some capacity by attempting to live justly, and you limit other people's freedom by enforcing your justice upon them. So let's just go all in while we're here. I want you to imagine a triangle, okay? Just a regular triangle, lines connecting each of the three corners. The corners are labeled freedom, order, and justice. I cannot explain to you why this works, but it works. When you're analyzing any of the Marines, you can place them at some point on the triangle. And this essentially describes their nature as a Marine and how they are compelled to act. So take Garp as an example. He is mostly on the freedom corner exclusively. Obviously, order is something that does not matter to Garp, and he doesn't follow the rules. But you also gotta realize that he spent his entire career chasing Gold D. Roger, not because it's really the right thing to do. It is simply what he wanted to do, because Garp loves to fight. He loves playing Marine. And of course, Garp has his own sense of justice, but he hardly ever acts on it. It is not what motivates him. Akainu, meanwhile, is on the order corner. He is opposed to freedom pretty obviously, and he is not compelled by any specific form of justice. Justice to him is order, maintained by the Marines as an organization. But here's where it gets spicy. Aokiji is between freedom and order. He believes in the order enforced by the Marines, but he prefers when it is expressed individually. And Aokiji has spent the majority of the story trying to discover what justice means to him. He does not really know what is right or what is wrong, leaving him with lazy justice, or basically the inability to act. So Aokiji, sitting between these two corners, has been pulled apart and broken. Kizaru, however, is between order and justice, meaning Kizaru has a good sense of right and wrong, morality and ethics. He feels these things, and they compel him, but he believes in the order enforced by the Marines. These two things pull him in opposite directions and hurt him, and I believe that Egghead has made it clear that Kizaru is at odds with freedom, for himself and for others. So who's on the justice corner? Well, I think that is Kobe. Kobe is primarily motivated by what he feels like is right, and he is absolutely not bound by the order of the Marines, nor do I really think that freedom is something which describes him or motivates him. In my mind, Kobe, similar but different to Garp, is this wrecking ball of empathy. He does not do what he wants. Instead, he tries to do what he thinks is right, and this leads to self-sacrifice, which doesn't bother him none. So you might notice a pattern here. The Marines with the most conviction sit on the corners, because if you're pulled in the direction of any of the other corners, it is a contradiction of some sort. It's a state which is difficult to exist within. This leaves Smoker somewhere in the middle of justice and freedom, and not constrained by the order. Basically, Smoker's role in the story is very similar to Garp's role in the past dealing with Roger. Smoker has been chasing Luffy around the world. However, this journey has affected Smoker way differently than it affected Garp, because unlike Garp, he has pursued this because of justice, which has motivated his adventure. Smoker is basically a really cool concept of a character who used freedom to rediscover what justice means to him. We could go on forever, but you don't have all day. The point is to lead up to Dragon. And I think Dragon is the perfect character to fit squarely in the middle of the triangle. He is in roughly equal parts compelled by order, freedom, and justice. He strongly feels what is right and wrong. He is willing to enforce justice on his own terms. He wants other people to determine what they believe and what they want for themselves, but he actually accomplishes this within the framework of the order which already exists. And he has no desire to destroy the system, just the celestial dragons. So basically, I think that Dragon was the perfect Marine. And perhaps it is fitting that in order to satisfy his compulsion, his drive, he had to create a new organization. So I feel like I just bombarded you with information, much of which potentially doesn't seem relevant to our discussion about Akainu and Dragon. But I personally think that context should never be ignored. And this is all context. And I think the key thing that this helps illuminate is the idea of Dragon as the Prodigy, as the future of the Marines. It's an interesting thought that Garp essentially spent his entire life looking for his successor, and this all began with Dragon. Dragon was the first failure. Look, theory triangle aside, it's all very interesting that Dragon is perhaps the character that best fits all three aspects and therefore is pulled in so many different directions that he creates this new heroic entity, because justice cannot be served the way that things are. But perhaps the simple thing that needs to be understood is that Dragon is the son of Garp, who is literally called the hero. There is absolutely no doubt that the Marines had very high expectations for what Dragon might someday become. From an early age, it's really easy to envision that they thought that he would be a future admiral. And this is absolutely something that the government thought about, because we saw this in Big Mom's flashback. As CP0 is meeting Mother Carmel discussing the purchase of Big Mom, they straight up say that she has the potential to one day become an admiral, possibly even a fleet admiral. Dragon, as the son of Garp, has obviously got great bloodlines to one day be incredibly powerful. Most likely he was also very talented, but beyond that, I mean, talk about Big Mom as potentially an admiral, totally ignoring aspects of her personality, but Dragon's personality is perfect. It's literally perfect. You couldn't design it any better. He is a leader by nature. He is intelligent. He is charismatic. He is empathetic. He's driven in the pursuit of justice, but he's not held back by order or by structure. That man had Fleet Admiral written all over him. And this is important to understand because as Akainu grew up in the Marines with Dragon, most likely, he would have been very aware of this. And once you say this out loud, ignoring any possible backstory between the two characters as kids, it's this alone which justifies why Akainu would see Dragon as possibly the biggest threat in the world to the Marines. And I think that this was subtly conveyed in Marineford. When Akainu encounters Luffy, he calls him Dragon's son over and over, in a way which makes you realize how important Dragon is to Akainu. Guys, do you think that it's fair to speculate that Akainu saw Dragon as the person in the Marines that he was chasing? Like, if Akainu had lofty goals when he joined the Marines of one day becoming an admiral and leading the Marines and perhaps even becoming a hero like Garp, then maybe he existed in the shadow of Dragon. I really hope that when and if we get Akainu's flashback, I'm expecting a flashback, we'll see. But I hope that that story is banger, mainly because I feel like that there is a lot of potential. Right now, the thing that defines Akainu in my mind is that nobody is a bigger fan of the Marines. The only thing that we know is that Akainu grew up rough, based on how Oda drew him as a child. Was he the son of a pirate and that story went wildly wrong? Was he a poor orphan that was caught in the crossfire and then ultimately saved by the Marines? Either way, it's an interesting foil that as Dragon got deeper into the Marines, he found things about it that he did not like and that he wanted to change. And I think that the same thing was true of Akainu. And funny enough, I think that the things that he did not like are Dragon and Garp. I think that everyone can understand Akainu's frustration from being behind Dragon simply by lineage. Is Akainu weaker than Dragon? Is he less able, less competent than Dragon? Probably not. Akainu became a very successful admiral. He is currently the Fleet Admiral. That's as high as you get. He was talented. And then imagine how he felt seeing both of these characters probably be rebellious in different ways against the Marines, but they got away with it. So we can only speculate the exact nature of the relationship of Dragon and Akainu. Is it like Might Guy and Kakashi from Naruto? Was Dragon just better than Akainu? And maybe in some ways aloof, not really concerned about the rivalry itself. Meanwhile, Akainu is Might Guy, training endlessly to surpass Dragon, while Dragon doesn't care. Or maybe the rivalry was more legitimate. Both were equal in power, but ironically, Dragon is the one with the privilege. But how you want to take it really depends on the kind of story that you want, and we'll see what Oda has to deliver. What I think is definitively true, however, is that Akainu came to despise both Dragon and Garp. And when Dragon left the Marines to join the Freedom Fighters, I basically think that that created the Akainu that we see today. I think that this event taught Akainu that the Marines are not just threatened by evil forces from outside, the world of pirates and criminal activity, the underworld. They're threatened from inside. And this might legitimately be a bigger problem in Akainu's mind, because the Marines exist in order to fight evil and fight criminals. When evildoers are being evil, the world understands. But how exactly do you fight people that claim or imply that it is the Marines themselves that are evil? Kind of a fun fact, but if you observe what Akainu has actually done in the story, he has fought pirates not very often. Obviously, he had his duel with Whitebeard, but outside of that, what is Akainu doing? Attacking the civilians of Ohara, attacking actual Marines in Marineford. But here's where it gets crazy, right? Again, for the vast majority of the Battle of Marineford, what was Akainu doing? He was literally trying to destroy the Whitebeard pirates from inside. He was doing what Dragon was doing, but intentionally. He was doing to the Whitebeard pirates what he himself feared for the Marines. Basically, the point that I want to convey is that Akainu is not actually concerned with the world of pirates. He is mainly concerned about battles that can't be won with legitimate fighting. I was having a chat with my friend Yahweh Theories, and he had a take about Marineford that I want to share. And the idea is essentially that Akainu never really cared about Ace. Revisit the moment that Akainu kills Ace. Akainu, of course, provoked and challenged Ace, but in the definitive moment, Luffy drops his Vera card, bends down to go pick it up, and then we see Akainu's eyes veer to him, and then he attacks him, right in the middle of his duel. The theory is that Luffy was his target all along and not Ace. Not that he liked Ace, but Akainu's grudge against Dragon weighed more. If Akainu could only kill one of them, he would have preferred to kill Luffy. You can even go so far as to speculate that Akainu goaded Ace because of Luffy. And Oda might also have baked in some irony into this scene that we won't fully appreciate until this relationship is explored. But what we know about Dragon is throughout the story, he has tried to hide his connection to Luffy most likely in order to protect him. When Luffy meets Ivankov, a longtime friend of Dragon, he didn't know that Dragon even had a son, let alone that Luffy was that son. And so this works on two fronts simultaneously. From the Marine side of things, the fact that Dragon is the literal son of the hero of the Marines, Monkey D. Garp, that bit of history was erased. Dragon turning traitor was a threat, but Dragon also had to allow it. So most likely he covered up his name even before Luffy was born, and he probably did this, in my opinion, because he knew his name might destroy the Marines, and the Marines were never his target. It was always the Celestial Dragons. He did not want to unnecessarily destroy things that he did not think were the problem. But I do think that this eventually flipped into some form of protection for Luffy. Dragon is very secretive, even to members of the Revolutionary Army, about his past. And so the irony of all of this is that it's possible that Luffy would have been more safe in Marineford had the revolutionaries, had Ivankov, been aware of Dragon and Akainu's relationship in past. If this was known, Luffy and the others would never have been caught off guard by Akainu's attack, and Ace would not have died. But it's just cool to think about how Marineford was a story about Ace and Gold Deep Roger, but then under the surface maybe, it's a lot about Luffy and Dragon, and it's almost hiding in plain sight. It's pretty interesting that Dragon does not trust the Revolutionary Army with his past. Genetics is a real thing in the story of One Piece. If you didn't believe that at the start, certainly you should believe that now, because genetics is cropping up everywhere. So it almost seems intentional that the trait that probably defines Luffy the most is trust, and Dragon appears to be the opposite. Now, I'm not gonna sit here and debate with you nature versus nurture regarding trust, because I'm not sure anyone actually knows whether someone's trusting nature is something that can be inherited. But I do wonder if Luffy got this more so from his mother than from his father. And this very well could play into Dragon's story. Why doesn't he trust the Revolutionary Army with his past? I have two thoughts. Because his wife or Luffy's mom had a trusting personality, and it cost her. Or maybe it is true that at some point in the past, Dragon was more similar to Luffy. He trusted, and it cost him. Look guys, I hate speaking out of both sides of my mouth, but there's like two ways that my brain thinks about things. There's one, what I think is likely, and two, what it is that I actually believe. Because what's ultimately going to happen in the story of One Piece isn't always what is most likely, what is most foreshadowed, what is most justified. If you 100% always believe these things, you will be wrong a lot. Like for real, there's a lot of haters out there, but it's legit true that sometimes a cool idea is the best theory. Honest to God, sometimes people find the most convoluted ways to be lame. I, of course, have never been guilty. So anyway, I just want to throw in a side theory here that I don't think is particularly justified, but I do think is very intuitive, and I don't think that it fits well for a short format. In this video, we've talked about Dragon as Garp's son, and I don't think that that is entirely true. Just now, we've speculated that Luffy is more similar to his mother than his father. But we've also talked about in this video how similar Luffy is to Garp. I find it intriguing how Dragon has seemingly adopted one name. He used to be Monkey D. Dragon, but now his friends and the world at large know him as Dragon, the Revolutionary. And I wonder if this is a product of his past. Basically, when Dragon was a child, he did not possess a last name. He was not of the Monkey D family. So losing the name wasn't a big deal for him. This might seem wildly unjustified to you, but I do think that there's a lot of small things added up together that makes this possible. My idea is that Roger knew that Garp would raise Ace because he had already raised a child that was not his. It's also a really fitting parallel or foil that both Roger and Garp raised different people that were not their children. Roger raised Shanks, while Garp raised Dragon. And it's even more fitting to me in my mind that what is Shanks? Well, Shanks is a celestial dragon by lineage. The pirate Gold D. Roger raises a celestial dragon. So then Garp, the hero of the Marines, raises the child of a pirate. Again, this is why Roger trusted Garp to raise Ace, because Garp had already raised a child of the quote-unquote enemy. Roger knew that. So the very intuitive but not highly justified theory that I have in mind is that Dragon is actually the son of Rock's Sabak. And when you look at Rock's silhouette and you look at Dragon, the similarities are certainly there. But even more from a story standpoint, this just makes an absurd amount of sense. Oda is preparing for another Marineford type reveal of lineage, this time regarding Luffy. That essentially Luffy is the grandson of Rocks D. Zebek. But you gotta realize that I'm not saying that Luffy is not related to Garp, even if Dragon isn't Garp's biological son. The theory is that Dragon from the age of about 15 or 16 was adopted by Garp after God Valley. My specific thought, again utilizing the power of the parallel, is that Dragon was raised by Rocks D. Zebek like Luffy was raised by Dragon. Meaning, despite Dragon being Luffy's father, Luffy was not raised by him. In the same way, Rocks is Dragon's father, but Dragon was not raised by him. But Rocks, with his potentially dying breath, if he is actually dead, asked Garp to find his son. Roger was there to hear it. It's quite possible in order to protect him, Garp gave Dragon his name. And it's possible that Dragon may have fell in love with Garp's biological daughter. So through Luffy's mother's side, he is Monkey D. Luffy. But through his father's side, he's actually Rocks D. Luffy. Like I said, I 1,000,000% expect this reveal. It's just how the story of One Piece works. But with this keystone detail, right, you can potentially unlock Dragon's full story. We know that once Goldie Roger died, right, the world government scoured the earth for his child. 40 years ago, Rocks D. Zebek was kind of a big deal. And it is my opinion that the government treated Rocks the same as they treated Roger, meaning if they suspected or had any inkling that he had a child, they would have looked for him. I think that Garp protected Dragon and essentially introduced him to the Marines. But just like Ace, the government eventually found out. But in this, you'll note a very key difference, which is that the world knows about Goldie Roger. So when you had Ace's public execution, the exclamation that Ace was the son of Roger, people understood that. But Rocks D. Zebek was covered up and erased from history. Recently in the story, I feel like Oda has really elaborated on how the Celestial Dragons and specifically the Gorosei operate regarding Kuma. It's potentially fitting here that we're essentially speculating Dragon to be very similar to Kuma, basically a criminal by lineage, but in a way that the government can't actually acknowledge. They don't even want people to know about the race of Buccaneers. They just quietly erase them. But every now and again, problems arise that can't be solved easily with Kuma. Yes, they wanted to kill Kuma, they simply couldn't. It was the same with Doflamingo, right? They just couldn't kill Doflamingo. And I think Dragon was the same. The story that I have in my mind is that when Dragon was relatively young as a Marine, he was secretly targeted by Cypherpole. Ultimately, it is because of Cypherpole's actions in order to kill him, because he is the son of Rocks D. Zebek, why Dragon left the Marines and began to hold a grudge against the Celestial Dragons, because Cypherpole, especially Cypherpole Zero, are their agents. And it's also worth throwing out there that Dragon might be in some respects influenced by Rocks D. Zebek, depending on what Rocks believed. But anyway, headcanon or not, the purpose of all of this is to speculate the relationship between Akainu and Dragon. So how exactly did the Marines find out that Dragon was the son of Rocks D. Zebek? Maybe it was through Akainu. Either he found out by being a weasel like we know Akainu to be, or perhaps Dragon simply told him. But if it did go like that, you would 100% understand why Dragon would never again reveal his past to anybody. I apologize for getting so wildly tinfoil there. I really do, guys, but with something like this, I kind of feel like you have to. Because what we want is the juicy details, which we're not likely to figure out, based exclusively on what we know. But I suppose it's time to bring this all home and speculate what is left to speculate. So generations, ages, and eras is a common concept in the story of One Piece. And I think that Dragon and Akainu were a part of the Marine version of the supernova. Kizaru is 58, Dragon and Akainu are 55, and Aokiji is 49. The ages are simply way too similar for us to not make this speculation. It's kind of like if Roger was still alive today, he'd be 77 years old. Garp is 78. Rayleigh is also 78. Big Mom is 68. And Whitebeard would be 74. Because generations. But I think that the timing of all of this is incredibly important. Like, ask yourself, why did all of the great Marines come about at approximately the same time? You can even throw somebody like Fujitora into this mix as well, because he is 54. And basically, I like to believe that world events matter. You can think about Goldie Roger during his execution inspiring the great age of piracy. Well, what is that? It's pirates flooding the world. But we know that combat makes fighters grow. So who are the Marines on the front lines fighting against this? Most likely they were strong vice admirals at the time. Vice admirals such as Kizaru, Aokiji, and Akainu, all of them in their physical prime. You can even think about why all of them might have been inspired to become Marines. 40 years ago was God Valley. In the 10 years which preceded it, we saw the rise of Gol D. Roger as a pirate. It's also around the same time that we see that Brook began his adventure as a pirate. Essentially during this time, I think that there was another boom in piracy, and directly related to that was the rise of the hero of the Marines garb. All three of the original admirals grew up from childhood during this age, and I think that that affected their dreams and ambitions. So the point of all this is that all three original admirals are all roughly the same age because they were born at the right time, inspired to join the Marines because of world events, and growing while in the Marines because of world events. But so here's the thing, at the age of 15, probably very soon before or after Akainu joined the Marines, was God Valley, and the story of Rox D. Xebec. Essentially, in Akainu's Marine formative years, Xebec was the most evil person on the planet. So you could see how, to Akainu, somebody being related to Xebec would mean so much more than somebody related to Gol D. Roger. All you really need to believe to make this true is that Akainu knew about Xebec while he was alive, and I would be really surprised if he didn't. So this makes Xebec, for Akainu, his white whale, the boogeyman that he grew up hearing about. Or maybe he actually encountered him, the physical manifestation of the kind of person that Akainu dreamed of taking down as a Marine. And again, I really think that Oda is surgical with the details of Akainu's story, given the limited amount of time that we've spent with him in order to convey this. What was the big event that we know about in Akainu's past for a fact? It was Ohara. Akainu went scorched earth on the civilians of Ohara, regardless of whether they knew the truth, simply for the fact that the island was studying the Void Century. And coincidence or not, one of the few things that we know about Rox D. Xebec is he was interested in and broke many of the world's taboos. I'm pretty convinced that this includes the pursuit of the poneglyphs. So Akainu was heavy-handed against Ohara because he feared that they might create another Rox. So one of Akainu's greatest fears, possibly his greatest fear, is the weaponization of the knowledge that the world government does not want known. Perhaps this is what Akainu believes will actually destroy the government and the Marines, and not necessarily brute strength. So it's for this reason that I think that the faction that Akainu is most concerned about in the world right now is the Revolutionary Army in Dragon, because Dragon is doing what Rox did, pursuing taboo information with the explicit purpose of trying to turn the world upside down. We didn't know this at the time, but we know now that Jewelry Bonnie is the daughter of Kuma, and that she was being used in order to control him. Kuma, who we know is an important member of the Revolutionary Army. So when Blackbeard found and captured Bonnie post-Marineford, he contacted the government, he contacted the Marines, and who showed up? It was Akainu. When Akainu meets Bonnie, he tells us that a cold shiver ran up his spine when he had heard that she had escaped. Maybe it makes more sense if Akainu fears the Revolutionary Army. Have you ever wondered why Akainu and Aokiji's legendary duel took place on Punk Hazard, the former lab of Dr. Vegapunk? It's really interesting now considering the relationship that Vegapunk has with Bonnie, with Kuma, and the Revolutionary Army. I think that it's possible Akainu chose this site in order to hide the evidence. He wanted to melt the island, believing that one day Vegapunk's transgressions might be used against the government and the Marines. And it's possible that evidence might exist there. And again, even recently in the story with Egghead, Kuma goes on the loose, and who tries to stop him? Who encounters him? Akainu. So all of this leads to a point. It may be true that Dragon has no interest in fighting Akainu. He has no interest in fighting the Marines. But I don't think that the opposite is true. And you might sit there and tell me, well, duh, JB, the Marines care a lot about the Revolutionary Army. Obviously, Dragon, one of the most wanted men in the world, like, this is not breaking news. But I really think that Akainu puts Dragon and the Revolutionary Army higher on the villain tier list than anybody else. And it's personal, and they have history. Meaning a thing that people do not often speculate is that the story might need, at some point in the future, a Dragon and Akainu fight. That is actually what Oda has been building up for Akainu the entire time. And up until now, Dragon has essentially been slippery and avoided it. But there may come a time where he can't. And everything that we've speculated in this video might be relevant. In the story of One Piece, fights almost always have a purpose, an ideological purpose. And I think that between Dragon and Akainu, it's that Akainu has or will essentially become Dragon, but in a wildly different form. Through his experience as a Marine, he has discovered things about the system which he would like to change. A fight with Dragon is really a continuation of Akainu's fight with Aokiji that was off-screen, but I don't think that this one will be off-screened. Dragon vs. Akainu is about what justice really means, and how it should be enforced. When and if the world breaks, and when and if the Marines separate from the government will be no different than the pirates. They are known evil, but Dragon and the revolutionaries are rivals. Akainu must defeat them if he is to become the hero of the world, and the world's chosen justice. Well, this ended up being a lot longer than I thought that it would be, but I really hope that you guys feel like you learned something from this. Like, you think about Dragon and Akainu a little bit differently. The theory really boils down to the purpose that I started off with is simply to speculate a Dragon and Akainu fight, something that I think is incredibly obvious with the reveal that Dragon was a former Marine and that Dragon and Akainu are exactly the same age. You could basically stop there and you would get the idea. But it's through exploring all of these connections that I feel like it really brings it to life and makes me personally excited about it. The other thing which I feel like this brings up as a question that we didn't really address in the video because I feel like too many things are possible is, well, how do you have an Akainu Dragon fight? How does Oda prepare the story for it? What does Dragon and Akainu do leading up to this moment? Could it involve Sabo? Could it involve Luffy? These sorts of connections, like, there is a ton of possibility. Honestly, because Akainu is the way that he is. He's devilish. He's a schemer. You could have a really great lead up. But I'm just going to leave that for you guys to think about and for Oda to hopefully, maybe, potentially one day get to. But anyway, I hope that you enjoyed the video. If you have any thoughts, leave them in the comment section below. Remember, check out my book, The Booms. Link is in the description. Like the video, subscribe, click the bell to be notified, join the squad, and as always, guys, have a wonderful day.